Welcome back to the DGD podcast. As always, the NCDGD himself, Robert Reynolds, and Mr. Juan Daniels.
What's up?
Happy
What's up?
Friday. Happy Friday, everybody. Listen, if you're starting early, happy Memorial Day weekend. Let's not forget the fallen, okay? This is what this is about. It's not about veterans currently. They would understand. It's about the fallen. So if you see a veteran, make sure to let them know, hey, we haven't forgot the fallen. That's all you got to do. And be safe, by the way, be safe. But Juan, welcome back, my man. How you doing?
Good, good, good. Hey, it's Friday. You know what? Georgia Bulldogs are still national champions. So what do I have to complain about?
Yep. Every day I wake up, I put my pants leg one leg on at a time, knowing that we are the champions. Okay, just leaving that there. As Mr. Oliver says, the 63-3 DGD is in the place to be. I like to
My
hear that. I
man,
like to
my
hear that.
man.
I'm telling you, we've still got to do a show about the 63-3. It's coming, guys. It's coming. We have to talk about that. But let's jump straight into it. Let's jump straight into it. Conference realignment and conference realignment and potential. What is that? What does it look like? Right? What does it look like when Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC? Right? We've heard tons of shit about different models, different theories, right? Divisions, pods, all this. And we'll go jump straight into this. I'll tell you right now. One, I'm gonna let you talk on this too. My feeling, you have to do pods with 16 teams. You just have to. But I want to hear what you have to say about, the divisions versus the pods debate.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of pods. I also like the idea of the divisions as well. But obviously, too, you want to break it up in a true East-West situation. Where and it's going to be even. Obviously, you want to take a Oklahoma and a Texas. I don't want them playing in the same division. I actually kind of want them to be split up. Again, you don't want a Georgia, Alabama, those big heavy hitters all in one. Where you're just having one side that's going to be top heavy, or or you're going to have some pods that's just going to be top heavy. You just kind of have to mix it up a little bit because nobody wants to see, honestly, the Vanderbilts and the Missouris, playing each other, or Vanderbilt versus South Carolina. You want to see some big time heavy hitting football.
I'm with you. Now, at the same time, so we listen, today is going to be a graphic based show. Okay. I'm just letting y'all know this for those watching and for those listening. We'll do our best to kind of break down what's going on. So obviously we've talked about the conference realignment. We're going to talk some scheduling, right? This is my proposal for a SEC schedule, right? And we'll break it down. But my thing, one, and obviously, listen, we can either agree or disagree. I'm perfectly fine with it because that's what drives conversation. But my feeling for the optimal, right, 16 team conference, I think you have to go pods. And I'm going to show a graphic that kind of breaks this down and I'll explain. Oh, not the right thing. Sorry, guys. All right. So my conference alignment, you look at Central, East, West, and the South, right? I think in the Central, you have LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Missouri. I think, looking at that right there, that's kind of geographic based, right? But at the same time, you're still getting some good matchups there. In the East, I think it's simple: Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, and South Carolina. In the West, you've got Arkansas, Oklahoma, A&M, and Texas. Now, I've gotten some feedback from other fans in this conference or in the Texas and Oklahoma fans that just see that not happening, right? Texas A&M and all this other stuff. I think that if Greg Sankey wanted to get it done, he would do it. I don't think these schools have the say so and the power yet, especially being new SEC members, to be able to do that. And in the South, you've got Bama, Auburn, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. Now, I want to get your thoughts on this one. Seeing this for the first time, perhaps, where do you stand on something like this? Being the new proposed per se conference alignment from Pod 7.
Um, I tell you what, I do like it. There's a couple things that I would probably move around. I would take a Kentucky and move it over to the South. Um, just kind of mix that up a little bit. Only just because you got Vanderbilt, Tennessee. and Kentucky. So all of those are going to line up. I like the West, where, you know, all of those teams are basically right there. It almost kind of reminds you of the old Southwest Conference, you know, back in the day, where you had the Arkansas and Texas and all that group. LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. I think that's good. Obviously, I would probably want to, you know, man, that's a tough one. I try to probably drop Arkansas into that South, put Missouri over there with that Texas A&M group. You know, because regionally you want them all to just to kind of be together a little bit, and then just kind of go region. But again, I love the pod look more so than that conference look. That pod look actually looks really, really good.
You know, I think in a sense right here, right? Like as we go into the scheduling, right? I want everybody to understand that, like what you're seeing right here in my head, right? From the criteria for scheduling, right? I think it'll make sense. So if we need to, after we talk scheduling, right, I can post this back up and you'll kind of get a picture for where I'm going with it. Okay. So I want to keep that in mind. And listen, if you're in the brigade right now, feel free to let us know what you think, man. If it's a shitty take of, let me know. Listen, that's what we're here for. So be real, be honest. That's what we're here for. You know, but listen, as it stands right there, you know, when it comes down to it, I think it'll make sense as well. Juan, my criteria though for you know, for the conference schedule though, right? So for me, I think, and it might sound crazy, but I'll explain it. You have your 3 pods, right? Your 3 games against your pod members, and then 2 permanent crossovers, 2. And the reason why I say that is this: if you have 2, right, you can sit there and preserve an old traditional rivalry, right? And because if we go back, right, for instance, we'll use Georgia as an example. Georgia would play Florida, Kentucky, and South Carolina, right? But then you could leave yourself questioning, well, what about the Deep South Soldiers rivalry, right? You'll see why I'm saying that, but it makes sense when you see the 2 hypothetical crossover matchups, right? You could also see new rivalries being made, right? When you look at LSU and Florida, for instance, right? That's a permanent crossover game that has really become a really good game and must-see TV almost, right? Especially when both teams are clicking, right? Juan, I want to get your thoughts here. If you had to choose your scheduling, how would you set up your schedule for the SEC slate?
Meaning, like, you know, how am I doing it? Yeah, obviously, I would do. You're going to play 3 games, and then you're just going to do some same. You always want to have your Georgia Auburn. You know, you're always going to have you know, your Alabama, Tennessee is always just, you know, that's been just kind of ruined. LSU, Florida, and but you know, you just kind of have to mix it. But also, if I'm the SEC, I don't know if he.
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Sounds like we can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, but with the SEC being as big as you are, we're going to have those blockbuster matchups. And that's the biggest thing is, you know, what kind of blockbuster matchup will we have? I'd love to see, you know, the SEC potential champion each year. I'd love to see them have an opportunity to each year.
Absolutely. And listen, so like I said, my hypothetical matchup is your 2 permanent crossovers. And what we'll do here is we'll start off, right? We'll start off breaking down each team and their proposed schedule. Now, I think you have to go to a 9-conference game schedule. So if you're taking 3 pods, 2 crossovers, that's 5. So you have 4 remaining. Listen, 4 round robin style games each season is still going to be better than if you were to keep a division, right? Because let's be honest, it is a shame that Georgia has yet to go to Kyle Field and will not until 24. And listen, SEC, Texas A&M joined in 2012, right? We've yet to go since they've joined. And like I said, in 2024 will be our first year going to Kyle Field. That has to change, right? Things like that have to change. And I think even with 4 round robin games, right? You'll still see teams playing each other home and home short in a quicker response than what you see right now with our divisions currently. And especially if you add two more teams to the conference. So what we'll do now, we're going to go ahead and start. We're going to go team by team. Okay. And you'll see, like I said, this is going to be heavy graphics, but this is my proposal, right? Everybody's got their proposals and stuff like this, but this is my proposal, and we're going to do it team by team. And first off, we're going to start with Alabama, right? So based off of my theory, Alabama would play each of its pod members, Auburn, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, right? So now you've got the Iron Bowl and Tennessee, Alabama. People might forget that that's actually a good rivalry game, even though Tennessee is kind of shit, has been shit for a minute. And then Vanderbilt, right? But your two crossover games, right? LSU, Oklahoma. And this is why I say this is going to be interesting, because you take a crossover like LSU. Listen, LSU, Alabama has been a rivalry game. You've seen some of the best teams. You've seen championships. You've seen national championships, for that matter, being played between these two schools. You have to preserve that game, that rivalry. So, with that being said, and then you look at Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma joining in. I think that has the potential to be a very good rivalry game to set up moving forward, right? Setting it up for for the future. Bama and Oklahoma could be a really good matchup. It's a marquee matchup. You could look at Brent Venables coming in. I'm telling you right now, it has the making for a good rivalry game. What are your thoughts on this as well?
Again, I definitely like the pod setup. I would take. I know this sounds crazy. I would take Tennessee and Vanderbilt out of this pod and then put Georgia, South Carolina in there. I really feel like, to be honest with you, to have Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky, and maybe another team in there is going to make that one a little bit more competitive. For one of those, and even from a recruiting standpoint, because it's going to be tough for the Kentuckies, even though Kentucky's done very well this year and they're going to probably have another great year. It's going to be tough for Kentucky and Vanderbilt to compete in the SEC, if we're being honest, unless they're going to be in a pod where you can tell a recruit, hey, listen, you come to Vanderbilt. This is going to be your pod. You can actually win this pod, and you just go out there and we're going to build this program. So. But, and then you'll always have your Alabama crossover game. I do like the crossover or the round robin, especially Alabama with, LSU and Oklahoma. That's going to be awesome. You're going to have that top-notch Alabama team welcoming in one of the new proposed teams that are going to be coming in. But I do like this. Like I said, the only thing I would change is maybe putting Georgia and South Carolina in this little bracket. I would love to see Georgia play Alabama every year, and I think the world would like to see it. I mean, just kind of like Ohio State plays Michigan every year, and I think that's going to be must see TV, no matter what, because they are going to be the top tier programs.
Absolutely. Obviously, listen. So before we go on to the next team, I do want to make sure that people understand, like, listen, when it comes to setting this up, you want to make sure that you try to make it as even as possible, right? So hypothetically, whenever Texas and Oklahoma joins, right, we're looking at teams based off of current models and current schedules, current, roster build, everything like this. Outside of when this would be initiated per se, we can't predict that. So, who's to say like LSU and Oklahoma are, when Oklahoma joins their elite program. So this could be a murder show per se, right? So it's balanced, right? You're not going to like kill yourself in one year. But then, like I said, obviously we can't predict. So trying to think too far ahead might be a little bit misconstrued here. But right now, as it stands, I think for me, looking at Auburn, right? Auburn's in the current spot, but you have to preserve the Iron Bowl. That's just too big of a matchup, right? Tennessee, like I said, you get the rivalry games there, while still in the pod you're fitting geographically, right? I think to me, looking at the division setup right now, Missouri in the East makes no sense, and I think it needs to change, right? But if you take Auburn and move them to the East, then you have to worry about losing the Iron Bowl, which for money purposes you're not going to want to do. we're going to talk about Arkansas. So my proposed schedule for Arkansas would be Oklahoma, A&M, and Texas is your pod member, and then your two crossovers would be Vanderbilt and Mississippi State. Looking at the pod situation right now, right? Listen, the West, based off of my theory, it's kind of a murderer's row, honestly. I know Texas hasn't been good. They were not good last year, whatever. But I don't see them being down forever. So when you have Oklahoma, you have Texas A&M, which is only getting better. Texas right there. Listen, that's a daunting pod setup right there. So you kind of balance it out with Vanderbilt and Mississippi. Listen, if I had my way, Vanderbilt would not be in this conference. Okay, it just would not. But you have to let them play somebody. So put them against Arkansas, and then listen, Mississippi State with Mike Leach is always an X factor, right? You don't know what to expect. You really don't. It's like the Joker card. Put Vanderbilt and Mississippi State together, and Arkansas, Mississippi State. Listen, I've seen some interesting games between Arkansas and Mississippi State. I would expect that to continue. One, what do you see here that you would like to look at?
Yeah, I mean, I like this. I like the matchup. Again, if you're looking at this pod, it's the old Southwest pod. You bring in those old rivalries and stuff like that. What'll also be interesting about this whole thing is, again, the recruiting battle. Like, it's going to be, it's not going to just be on the field, but the recruiting battle is going to be out of this world. And so that's where you're really going to have to fight, and they're going to have to get some great players in there. Everybody's going to want to be, if you have this pod, everyone's going to want to be a part of this pod.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some feedback here. One so far, Michael B in the brigade says, no way you can have Bama, Georgia, Oklahoma, et cetera, in the same pods if you go pods. I kind of get it, but I'm telling you right now, it would be for some damn good matchups. I'm telling you that. And Mr. 63-3 says, I would love to see Georgia and the Gumps every year too, but he's afraid it would water down the rest of the conference and also eliminate one of the two from the playoffs, more than likely. And I get that concern as well, right? Now, obviously, when you go pods and listen, the talk of potential expansion for the playoffs, right? You might see something like that be able to be possible, and it still not matter to the point where you can still get in the playoffs. However, you don't necessarily know for sure. So I get Patrick's concern, I do, but I'm telling you right now, from a marquee matchup standpoint, listen, the SEC drives in a ton of money every year, right? The schools get so much money. I want to say it's like $60 million or something like that last year per school to divide up. And when Texas and Oklahoma join, I'm telling you that number is probably going to jump to 100 million plus. Okay, it just probably will. I'm just letting you know now. So, I understand that it's a money driver. It really is. But if you have, for instance, in a hypothetical model here of Bama and Georgia in the same pod, like say, for instance, if you had, say Florida, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama in the same conference or in the pod, how would that, I want to hear your thoughts on it. Like, would it be too much, or, because then you have to disperse the other teams between the pods? Would it be a balance, or what are we thinking here?
It kind of reminds you of that whole Ohio State, Michigan. I mean, Ohio State, Michigan, basically for years have run the Big Ten. And they're going to be those marquee matchups, and one of them's going to go, one of them's going to stay when it actually comes to the playoffs. But if you expand the playoffs, it's totally going to be fine, first and foremost. But again, you definitely, and Rude said it, you definitely want a balance of power. However, you want to have something that, again, is going to give other teams to play for. If you put Vanderbilt in a conference with an Alabama and somebody else, from a recruiting standpoint, who's going to want to go and play for Vanderbilt? Whereas, again, you take them and put them in at least a competitive, like you want to have one that's going to be at least competitive with a Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Kentucky, and maybe a Missouri. And although that may be probably the weaker of the pods, at least they're going to, from their pod games, it's going to be a crapshoot who's going to win those games. And then who's to say they're not going to be able to sneak up and beat somebody else. However, from a recruiting standpoint, if I'm a recruit and I may not necessarily be a top tier recruit, I can sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to go to Vanderbilt and I'm going to go and be able to compete against possibly a Kentucky or Missouri or somebody else. And Michael B., you said it, Vandy in any but has no shot. I mean, they just don't. So you at least want to just give them an opportunity just to try to be competitive. And if they don't play Missouri or Kentucky and maybe in Arkansas or somebody, they have no shot.
I'll tell you this though. Now, if I don't know how this would work in other sports because this is so football based, but if you had a pod set up for for baseball, right? Vanderbilt baseball is not a bad pod at all, right? So
Right.
you kind of make it and take it, right? Like every sport could do this differently, but take it, make it like an NL East, right? Where you have these teams play these divisions, play each other, whatnot, right? It could be done, right? So from a football standpoint, so if I'm not mistaken, what I'm hearing is if you put all like a murderer's row, right? Like you can look at the West right now, or for instance, putting Georgia, Bama, Auburn, Florida in one, right? The best will, the cream will rise to the top, right?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
everybody else, so what you're saying, it could create some kind of parity from that. Is that
and it will. I mean, you never know. Like I said, it's going to be one of those any given Saturdays. And it's funny because if you look on Twitter, you'll see a lot of times they'll post these tiers, right? These tier 1 teams, tier 2 teams, tier 3 teams, and so what's the point of putting Alabama in a pod where you've a Vanderbilt and a Kentucky, Missouri, or somebody that's just kind of like, and you're automatically thinking, okay, well, Alabama has skated through there. They're not tested. They hadn't really done anything versus, just like Michigan, Ohio State play every year. I'd love to see Alabama and Georgia play every year and be in the same pod. And also, too, the other part is even if one of them loses a game, there's a good chance, hey, they're still going to have an opportunity to play in the playoffs. They'll have an opportunity to maybe have a rematch at some point in time because, like you said, cream rises to the top. I think when the dust settles, it's probably always going to be Alabama and Georgia when we're competing for a national championship, one or the other.
I think you could take it this way. Like now, obviously, looking at a situation, right, which we could honestly make another show about how you determine conference championships, right? So I might save this for another day, but it might raise some questions if you have all those in one team, all those teams in one pot, how it determines the conference championship seeding per se, right? So, like I said, I think that's something to ponder on, right, as we continue on through these teams. Which is definitely interesting to hear, though. So thank you for that perspective, Juan. Moving on, though, to our next team, Auburn Tigers, right? Obviously, the pods, Alabama, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, but the crossover, Deep South Sodas rivalry, and bring in Texas A&M, right? I think A&M and Auburn, right? When Auburn is hitting and clicking, right? I think Auburn and A&M sets up for a very good matchup. Obviously, they play in the West right now. Typically see some really good games out of these two teams. So there's no new rivalries per se, right, for Auburn here, but Auburn's more so keeping these older traditional rivalries intact, right? So, like I said, it's a blend of creating new rivalries and preserving the older traditional rivalries. Auburn is a perfect example of preserving that. Do you think I know we've talked about the pod situation, but from a crossover standpoint, do you like the Georgia A&M setup?
Yeah, I like it a lot. That's a good look. And almost like, again, you take Vanderbilt and Auburn has murderers row. You got Alabama, a great rising Tennessee team, Texas A&M with all those crazy recruits and all that. I mean, that's a tough deal, but that's just something that you want.
Absolutely. So obviously we talked about Auburn, and now we get to move on to another rivalry. Those lousy, stinking Florida Gators. You know how I feel about them, Juan, but we got to do it. Obviously, Florida in the pod setup, you go South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, right? You get the cocktail party every year. But the crossover games, I think you go A&M, right? A&M and Florida has the potential, right, to be something. You don't really see this happen a lot, right? I would love to see this matchup, right, with A&M. If they're clicking, Florida, it has the potential to be, a team that's a very, serious contender in the East currently. But every year they have a shot. Florida, kind of create a new rivalry there, but preserve that LSU game, right? I really do like, I kind of look at it as a battle of DBU, right? Because they both claim DBU, but you get to see what teams, each year they play, and it turns out to be pretty damn good games, right? How much crazy shit has come from this? You look at Marco Wilson's shoe toss, right? So crazy shit's happened, especially, it seems like every year something crazy happens. So give me these 5 matchups for the Gators, and for me, I'm content with that. What are your thoughts on that?
The only one I would switch out, the crossover game, I'd switch out Texas A&M with Texas, and here's why. If you look at from a recruiting standpoint, right? People are going to want to see Florida, Georgia. They're going to want to see Florida, Texas. You sit there and think about where these top recruits are. They're coming out of Texas. They're coming out of Florida. They're coming out of Georgia. So why not, have the actual states, play each other for these, and basically what they're doing is they're playing for the right to recruit these kids and for these, these kids to come to their program. Obviously there's not, there aren't any California teams that are going to be adding in there. But when you're looking at top tier recruiting, it's Florida, Georgia, and Texas. So that's the only one that I would put in. But other than that, I like it.
You give me the perfect transition point, Juan. But before we transition, I do want to read some comments here. Rude says, or Michael B also says, don't forget, in this theory, there will be additional rotational games, so your round robin style games. And then Rude's, Rude's also brings up a good point. Vandy will just get killed in any pod, unfortunately. So, before we do this, how many Texas recruits over the years have come to Georgia? He brings up Stafford, right? And that comment right there is going to be my perfect transition to the Georgia Bulldogs. So
yeah.
With this being said, here's my theory for our dogs. You have South Carolina, you have Florida, you have Kentucky. You keep the D-South Sodas rivalry as you saw with Auburn before, but put Texas on the matchup every year. I'll tell you why. How old has it become that we hear the Sam Ehlinger, we're back? We get this heard all the time, and it is yet to be put in Texas's face, right?
Yeah.
Give me Texas every year. Welcome to the SEC. You're not ready. Stick to this matchup right here. I'm telling you right now. With that being said, though, huge brands. Georgia, Texas, huge brands. Also, 2 huge recruiting states. You mentioned Florida and Texas. Give me Georgia and Texas. Georgia per capita is the hottest state in the land for elite talent. You know this, Juan. You're down there. Buford alone has a ton of kids D1 ready. You know this. Give me Texas, Georgia, right? Texas is still running it about this bowl game that we lost by a touchdown, right? I get it. Give it to us every year. That's a marquee matchup. Tell me why Matthew McConaughey would be screaming all right. Just saying, right? So, listen, I think, and obviously, like I said, Georgia's the perfect blend here. I wanted to make an example out of this. We talked about preserving these rivalries, right? You have to. But Texas and Georgia every year, that is a build-up for a true rivalry game because of the stakes that you could see if Texas gets it together, which I think they will. They get it together. They could become the powerhouse in the SEC as well. They could. They very well could. Maybe right now we're laughing at them. I get it. They have unlimited resources. They have a hotbed of a state. It could be done. But give me Georgia and Texas. Listen, it just makes too much sense for me. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this one. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I love it. I mean, again, anytime that we're going to go play, that we're going to go play Texas, either they come to us or we come to them. I tell you what, it's going to be awesome. I love it. Rude says, Texas, Georgia called it the backyard barbecue brawl. Yes, indeed. But what we need Georgia to go to Austin and play and beat the brakes off of those guys, because again, that just kind of opens up recruiting. I mean, and again, the point that was just made the last time we really got somebody from Texas was was Matthew Stafford. But if they get an opportunity to see our brand of football and what it's all about, I just think that we're going to be able to pull in a few more few more of those recruits. And again, Georgia is hot right now, and they're going to continue to be hot. And so for them to go up there to Texas and beat the brakes off of them, every year, and them come to us, I think that's going to be great.
Now, understand this, right? We saw Alabama's, and Alabama had Oklahoma, right? While setting this up, the thought of Georgia, Oklahoma instead of Georgia, Texas crossed my mind, right? And we all know why. But I think from a marquee matchup standpoint, Georgia and Texas every year makes too much sense not to, because it will draw a ton of money whenever that game is played. It just makes sense. So keep in mind, I definitely thought about the Georgia Oklahoma situation. However, I think ultimately Bama and Oklahoma would be very interesting to see, and then Georgia Texas is just must see at this point, especially when Texas gets going, because if they are a sleeping giant, whenever they get awoken, we know what they're capable of doing. So if they ever do that, think about Georgia and Texas both at the peak of their performance and where they need to be. Must see TV. Moving on to the Wildcats of Kentucky one. Obviously, pod situation. South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Two crossovers, Ole Miss and Tennessee. I like the Kentucky-Tennessee matchup. I think, honestly, to me, I think it's an interesting game every year. I do. I think that game is always interesting. But when you have Ole Miss, Kentucky, you have the potential for a good matchup, because with looking at it now, Lane Kiffin, high-powered offense, and Kentucky's defense. Right? I think it's a good matchup of offense versus defense. So take Ole Miss, Kentucky could create a new rivalry, and then Tennessee, Kentucky is a good matchup that I think would be good to preserve what they're talking about every year. What are your thoughts on this one?
This is a tough one for me. I mean, obviously, yeah, you got to preserve that, that border battle with that Tennessee, Kentucky. Yeah, that's just, I guess, unless Kentucky continues to play some elite football, I mean, it's just, this is just one of those teams that you're just kind of like, let's just get it over with.
Yeah.
Kind of like Vanderbilt. Like when you look at Vanderbilt, and you're just kind of looking at wins and losses. I think Kentucky will perform decently in this pod, but I don't know how many people are jumping up and down to see them play Ole Miss or Tennessee. This is just a tough one for me.
I think when you look at it, right, like taking what Tennessee is right now with Stoops, I think is the key here for this.
Yeah, that's true.
With the matter, right, with the understanding of we cannot predict the future. So these hypothetical models would be based off of current right now.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Just right now, that it would just be a tough, again, like I said, you're looking at the when you're looking at the other tier teams like the Ole Misses and, and all, it's, a little bit more difficult, like the Missouris and all that. But again, based off of what this pod is, I mean, it's going to be a pretty good pod, and and the crossover games, I think, will be very competitive.
I'm with you there. All right, so we're going to move on. Obviously, Kentucky's kind of a wild card there, but we're going to move over to the Tigers, the Bayou Bengals down in Baton Rouge. All right, so with the pod setup, you have Missouri, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss, and like I said, preserving these rivalries is a must here for LSU. You have to have Bama and you have to have Florida. I think those are the two best rivalry games on their schedule every year. So, you could look at Auburn as well. I get that. But Alabama and Florida, in my opinion, would make more sense from a draw standpoint to have these as your crossover games. Thoughts on LSU?
I like it. I do. I see them obviously winning this pod. But again, anytime that you're going to have LSU, Alabama on your schedule, those are going to be two must-see TV games. So I like it.
Absolutely. So before we go back, we'll go back here. Patrick says, all I keep hearing is that Kentucky Sports Talk guy on TikTok last year kept saying, we're coming. Did they never make it? I remember swatting
I love it.
I do too.
I love it.
All right, so moving on from LSU, right? I think overall this is a good pod set for them. Moving on to the Mississippi State Bulldogs, the Pirates, if you will, of Mike Leach. Obviously, their pod contains Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee. I mean, not Tennessee, but LSU. Crossover games, Tennessee and Arkansas. All right, we talked about it. Arkansas, that's a good matchup, but I think kind of create a new rivalry, trying to see what can happen here, right? Trying to bring some relevancy to Mississippi State, right? It's kind of been one of those things where that school is, it's kind of like a dud in the West, right? Bring some matchups that I think could kind of get them going, right? And Tennessee, when they're hot, right, you could look at Tennessee as being a stepping stone to push Mississippi State up if they were to beat them, right? But I think that could be a good rivalry to come into play. But it also has the potential, right? Like I said, unpredictability coming into play. It could be a good or it could be a bad, pod for them. Look, hypothetically, right? LSU is always probably going to win this matchup, but hey, we saw them go to 7 overtimes. Remember that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So anything can happen there at Mississippi State. What are your thoughts on this one? And we'll try to move on to the next team because I don't
Yeah,
see
yeah,
them.
I like it. I like it. I think that they'll at least compete, and I definitely like the crossovers.
Fair enough. All right, moving on to the Missouri Tigers. Obviously, Missouri's pod, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Crossovers of Texas and Vanderbilt, right? Texas and Vanderbilt. Listen, that Big 12 type feel, right? The Texas and Missouri rivalry. That is a real thing. So you bring back that rivalry, and I think that is a good rivalry to have for Missouri, right? And then Vanderbilt, right? Listen, it's Vanderbilt, okay? This might be one of the kind of a weak games to match, but let's be honest. I've seen weak opponents play really good games because they're both equally as bad. I think Missouri can get, Missouri's going to get better eventually. You kind of have to think so. But regardless, obviously Vanderbilt is one of those teams you just have to. It's basically the shitty team that you just have to deal with, right? Let's be honest, call a spade a spade. Um, but my takeaway here though is the Texas Missouri rivalry coming back. That's just my takeaway for this one.
I'm sorry. I'm laughing at Patrick and Rudes.
If you're not,
You know,
in the brigade, guys, you might want to come in because
yeah.
it's getting hot in
I mean,
here.
Rudes is like, low key. Missouri has a tough schedule here. I mean, they've got a bomb, and Patrick said, I see one win on that schedule, maybe. I mean, this is you know, obviously, like you said, I don't see them doing anything in their pod. They'll get blasted by Texas, and then they're just basically going to have a battle on who's going to have the 1-win season.
It's the bottom. It's the bottom bowl. It's the bottom bowl.
It is. It's the bottom bowl. Who's going to have the 1-win season in the SEC? And then hopefully both of those teams, Vanderbilt and Missouri, have like a whole lot of FCS schools to kind of help them out.
So this poses a good question. Michael B here says, I know the pods are based on travel location, but does the SEC really care about travel like that? What are your thoughts on that? Like, I kind of don't know how to really answer that 100%, but I'm going to do my best, Mike. I look at it this way, right? I think ultimately from a pod setup, right, you have to look at what can draw money, right? And, you also want to kind of try to somewhat balance it out, right? You don't want two crossovers from the same pod if you can avoid that, right? But at the same time, Georgia has to go to Missouri every time, right? Like every other year. I mean, Georgia has to go to Missouri. Right? It makes no sense for them to be an East opponent, right? So at some point, right, you try to not really worry about the traveling as much, in my opinion, based off of scheduling, right? Based off of these marquee matchups, because let's be honest, we're seeing it now where you have the big Fox noon kickoff, right? Big noon kickoff. And you're seeing SEC football have to compete with that. So, just based off of recent memory for this season, you have South Carolina and Georgia at noon at Willie B this year. To me, it makes no sense. But I guarantee you, with it being on ESPN, the regular ESPN, they're balancing it to try to counter Fox noon kickoff. That's what they're doing, right? So, in my opinion, it's just trying to compete, right? So marquee matchups could draw different ratings and stuff like that. It's a hot mess, but it's above my pay grade as well. As the comment section gets even hotter.
Yeah.
I just want to take a second to say thank you for coming in the brigade. My God. Excuse me.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I am good. I'm dying slowly. Oklahoma, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Texas, Alabama, and South Carolina. I think that is a perfect setup because you have two huge brands again, Oklahoma, Alabama, and the South Carolina Oklahoma thing. I'm telling you right now, try to build a rivalry out of this, right? South Carolina is going to be one of those, just in the, I hate to say it, but kind of one of those middle tier programs that can, right, if the right things happen, can cause some chaos and havoc. But Shane Beamer, Spencer Rattler, Stogner, all this going to South Carolina, I'm just telling you, you have that writing there. Make something out of it. So put them in every year together. Listen, I'm sure Shane Beamer going back to uh, Norman every other year would be fairly interesting, right? Willie B is probably one of the better SEC environments. When Sandstorm's going, let's be honest, it's pretty interesting. So in my opinion, I think obviously with kind of like the Big 12 pod, right? Let's be honest, it's what it is. But then the Alabama and South Carolina, it's a balanced crossover matchup, while honestly creating new rivalries and really a battle of the brands with Oklahoma and Alabama. What are your thoughts on that one?
I do. I like it. That Oklahoma Alabama matchup is going to be good. I don't know if I think I would switch out that South Carolina one and maybe put an LSU there. And,
Mhm.
and I only say that just because, again, you go back to that semifinal where you had LSU and Oklahoma for that semifinal, with Joe Burrow and that group. I think Oklahoma is probably, wanting to, take on LSU right now, and I think that could be something that's huge. But other than that, I like it. I mean, Oklahoma, I think that they're going to be very competitive, and I think they're going to be pretty good.
See, my thoughts on this when setting this up on LSU being one of the founding members of SEC and stuff like that, having the Alabama game and having the Florida. See, I think you could look at it as being interchangeable with Florida, Oklahoma, right? But like I said, for me, I valued that rivalry that's been built currently with LSU and Florida. So, obviously that was kind of a matchup in my head. Fortunately, you get four round robin games, so it could happen every so often as well. So, that's the good thing about Texas and Oklahoma coming in as well too, into the SEC. With
Yeah.
that being said, let's move on to the Ole Miss Rebels. All right, Ole Miss Rebels, uh, Missouri, Mississippi State, LSU. Crossovers being Kentucky and South Carolina. Like I said, trying to avoid two crossovers within the same pod turned out to be actually impossible at this point for me. But I do think Ole Miss and South Carolina would be kind of an intriguing matchup to see. I really think so. However, it could also be a dud battle, a dud matchup, right? You have the potential to be either way here. Kentucky and Ole Miss, we've already talked about this with Kentucky. I think it's the same way, right? So this one's kind of one of those things where, this is kind of it's a what if situation here in the pod for Ole Miss. But I want to hear what you have to say about this one.
Before I do, Michael B., you made an excellent point. He said the thing I like about the pods is if you stay 4 years, you would have played every team in the conference at least once, and I love that because at the time that I played at Georgia, I mean I never had an opportunity to play against Arkansas or LSU, or to have the opportunity to go down to and play LSU, which I thought would have been great. And so having the opportunity to go around and play these different teams, I mean, I think that'd be great. So that's a great point. As far as this one, Ole Miss, again, I like the, it's it'll be a competitive pod with them and LSU and Mississippi State, and I do like those crossover games.
Yeah, no, I think you look at it, and like I said, I really enjoyed that take, Mike. I really like that comment. It makes 100 sense, 100% accuracy right there too. So, definitely it would be nice, right? It kind of brings some parity and balance, right? Like it's just one of those things. With that being said, let's move on to the Gamecocks of South Carolina. South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Kentucky, with your Ole Miss and Oklahoma kind of similar here. I think the Oklahoma and South Carolina thing could be a budding rivalry per se. And I think the Ole Miss and South Carolina game, I'm going to go back on this. Listen, I definitely think that there's an intriguing potential for this matchup. We'll quickly go over this one. What are your thoughts on this pod setup?
I do. I like it. I like it. Beamer's, doing some good things. I think a good introduction for OU is going to be South Carolina, and I think I like the South Carolina Ole Miss matchup as well. So I think this is going to be pretty good. It won't be as a super competitive pod for or super competitive situation for South Carolina. However, I think again going out there playing different teams, I think this will be a perfect situation for them.
Absolutely. We're going up to Rocky Top now, boys. Tennessee Vols, Alabama, Auburn, Vanderbilt, and then Mississippi State and Kentucky. With that being said, like I said, Mississippi State is always an interesting team. And Tennessee, you're kind of a sleeping giant as well in the SEC. So I definitely think there's some intrigue there if you play them every year, right? What could happen at Mississippi State? What could happen? And then that border rivalry with Tennessee and Kentucky. I think the main takeaways here for Tennessee is preserving the Alabama rivalry. Right? That's the biggest matchup there. And Tennessee fans will tell you that they legitimately hate Alabama, right? You look at Tennessee, could have Florida, could have Georgia. I just think that preoccupied, right? Georgia's preoccupied, Florida's preoccupied. Tennessee, I still think there's some intrigue there for those crossovers, but that's why the round robin games are too. Think about this. Obviously these would be permanent fixture games. However, when you look at a Tennessee, Florida or a Tennessee, Georgia, once every 4 years or whatever the case may be, you're going to be very excited to play them, right? You have bragging rights for 4 years, especially if Tennessee were to get good within the 3 years that Georgia hasn't played, or within the 3 years that Florida hasn't played Tennessee. What if Tennessee becomes a powerhouse, right? And then what does that mean for a Georgia-Tennessee matchup when you see it once every 4 years? There's a potential there to be some very intriguing talk come that season, right? With this format. So, just because it's not one of the 5 fixture games, definitely, looking into it, right? Gives you some time for Tennessee to build up, right? It gives time for, things can happen within that time between the next matchup, right? So, and it's like I said, it's not your division matchup like Georgia and Texas A&M. That shit's gone with this model. So, definitely something to keep an eye out for with these round robin games for sure. I feel like we don't talk about the round robins here so far that much, but what are your thoughts on this quickly with Tennessee's pod setup?
Yeah, I like their pod. Only one I'd switch out Mississippi State and maybe give them an Arkansas. I think historically Tennessee, Arkansas have had some big time major battles back in the day. The Darren McFadden's and all that group. So I would switch those two. Outside of that, it looks pretty good.
Absolutely. Now we're going back out west. We're going to those Aggies, right? Aggies, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas in your pods. Crossovers of Florida and Auburn. Like I said, I like this pod setup. I think it's definitely a daunting task for Texas A&M, especially looking at it right now. Auburn, if they get it together, this could be a murderer's row. It really could. But other than that, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. That this could be a tough one. I would say I would probably switch that Florida game and maybe put in Alabama. Because right now, what's going on with Saban and what's going on with those two right now. I mean, it's ugly, and then that probably, I wouldn't be surprised if that almost replaced that good old fashioned hate. I mean, those two absolutely abhor each other, and so. I'd love for that to be one of those crossover games, because that can be, probably as ugly as the Auburn. I'd almost venture to say right now you'd have Alabama fans that are probably more Auburn fans than they would be Texas A&M right now. That's how ugly it is right now.
Holy shit!
And it's gonna get worse.
There you go, Saban and Jimbo in the octagon.
Yeah.
God, Jake Paul, where are you? Sign this up.
Yes, sir.
So, God, you can go on about that. No, that is a good point. I just think that, ultimately, like A&M with this schedule right here, I kind of want to see Florida get involved with Texas, right? So get them into Texas, right? Like you mentioned earlier, that Texas Florida thing. I want to see that battle, right? I want to see that from a recruiting standpoint. You know what I mean? I think that has some intrigue there to build ultimately, because what are recruits going to look at? Are they going to want to go to Florida because of this, or do they want to stay at home? Definitely some intrigue there across the board. All right, moving on to those, the horns down. Oklahoma, Arkansas A&M. Like I said, keep that Missouri, and then the Georgia rivalry. Talked about it from a Georgia perspective. Texas standpoint, listen, your four of your five are old traditional rivalry games, right? Old traditional rivalry. So you're literally getting, from a Texas standpoint, a lot of your historic rivals are every single year now. So you get that fixated, consistent rivalry game feel every single time. Listen, if you have, obviously you have it at the Cotton Bowl, but if you have A&M and Missouri in Austin, you're going to sell out. Like, Texas and Missouri hate each other. Like, they do. They really do. And Arkansas is the same way. Arkansas hates Texas. They hate Texas. So you like those four alone right there. But then, like I said, it's the battle of the brands. Austin versus Athens. Perfect matchup set up from a revenue standpoint, period. But let's hear what you got to say about this one, and we'll move on to the next team.
Yeah, I second it. I think this is great. I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. I would not change a thing.
All right. You ready for a very, very fast one, Juan? Here we go. Last but not least, actually last and very much least, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mizzou. Listen, lost, maybe win. All right. Patrick called it pest. We're going to leave it at that. Enough talk about Vanderbilt. That's enough. I didn't even want to talk about them, but we have to. Moving on. So for a recap, Juan, here would be some notable matchups. If this theory were every year, these would be your notable matchups, in my opinion. Georgia, Texas, Alabama versus Oklahoma, Florida versus A&M, your Alabama LSU matchup, South Carolina, Oklahoma, I think would be actually a good matchup. Texas, Missouri, Deep South Southern rivalry, LSU and Florida. Would you add any other notable matchups here?
Like I said, the only one I would really want to see every year is going to be Georgia, Alabama. I'd love for the SEC to have a situation like the Big Ten, where every year you're going to see Michigan and Ohio State. The same thing with the former Big 12. Every year you would see Oklahoma, Texas. And those were pretty much the top tier of each of those conferences. I'd love to see Alabama and Georgia play every year.
Rudes mentions UGA versus Tennessee. If that was a hypothetical matchup that was proposed, you have that matchup every year. And I think Rude's talking about the Texas and LSU, perhaps. I don't know, Juan. Rude's, let me know in the comments which one specifically here. Winner has recruiting rights to the loser state for a year, essentially. And that's where I'm thinking the Florida, Texas, or the Georgia, Texas, to be honest.
Yep.
So, I mean, either way you look at that situation, right, from a Texas, Florida, or right, Texas, Georgia at that point. But all these states are hotbeds for talent anyway. So technically Georgia could say, hey, I came into Texas, I beat your ass. And Rudes is talking about Georgia versus Texas. So
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as the Georgia Florida, right? So if you think from a Georgia standpoint, since this is a Georgia podcast, right? Georgia could go to Jacksonville, beat them in Jacksonville. You have that bragging right. You go to Austin and beat them. Guess what that means? Hey, why you want to go to Texas when you got to come to Georgia and beat up on Texas every year, right? Huge recruiting stakes there, while making money because of two huge brands. So, listen, there's like either way you look at it, there's several different ways to spin it. But the 4-team pods with 3 pod matchups, 2 crossovers, 4 round robins, you're getting a good blend of new rivalries, preservation of old rivalries, bragging rights, recruiting, and then obviously, like you said, like you're hearing, big risk and big reward.
Yep.
Right? You try to be as balanced as you can, right? Obviously, we can't predict the future, but try to be somewhat balanced here. Just saying, it's the best way to, right? Georgia can go to a Kyle Field every so often, right? Not 12 plus years, right? That's important because from a Georgia fans, right? The Georgia fans travel so well. Tell me they wouldn't. How would they handle going to Austin other year, I mean, right? Or when Georgia goes to Norman, right? And let's flip it around. How is Georgia going to turn up when Texas comes to town every year? Or every other year? I keep saying that, but every other year. Or Georgia, Bama every 4 years. How's that going to look? There's so many potential matchups that's going to drive so much revenue, right? We just talked about this yesterday. Georgia's planning to spend 80-some more million for renovations to Sanford Stadium, your new tennis facility. You're paying Monken $2 million now. Like, Georgia's willing to spend money. And the fact that if you had this matchup, like these matchups every single year with the 4 round robins, holy shit, the money that could be made. TV deals are going to get insane when you have a Georgia, Texas, a Georgia, Florida every year. Like, there's so much money to be made. Bama, Oklahoma every year, interesting. Now, you said Bama and Texas would be interesting too. Like, it'd be insane. It just would be. It really would. Yeah. Overall, though, I want to get y'all's thoughts from the brigade. Definitely want to hear what y'all have to say. One, overall, I think the pod situation has to be the way this moves forward, right?
Yep.
The divisions, you cannot have 8-8 because what we're seeing right now with 7. There's no reason teams are going over a decade before playing. It just makes no sense. It just doesn't. So pods has to be the way. Added a little twist though, the 2 crossover games. I'm a fan of the crossover games. I really am. But you have 2. That way you can have some flexibility, right? If Georgia had just 1, think about it. You would have the old Deep South South rivalry. But what about those new rivalries that you could get every year, a la Georgia, Texas? I love it. Brigade, let me know what y'all say. Oh, my goodness. The Juan fan club is beginning. I'm loving it. You got Juan physically laughing out loud.
Yeah, they were going back and forth earlier on who's going to serve what role. If I'm the president, I definitely at least want to have a role in it too. So
yeah, I mean, so just saying. So you heard it here first. Co-signed by Patrick. Michael also says pods is a must. There you go. Overall, listen. The Juan fan club is coming. All right. If you're in the Bones Brigade, make sure to like, follow, subscribe. Right. Listen, that's how we grow. You want to get more folks in here having a Juan fan club? Let's get it done. That's how we do it. Grow.
My campaign slogan is going to be 63-3. So 63-3. That's going to be the campaign slogan.
63-3. Shit, not me. So, I mean, listen. We're gonna make a campaign edit for Juan. Okay, listen. It's getting time for them elections, man. I'm just saying right now. We got a campaign. We're gonna campaign. Oh, there we go. See, I told you. Look, there it is right there.
Yeah.
Bonds is a must. Juan Daniels for president. 63-3. Fair enough.
Go Dogs. That's what I'm talking about.
All right. With that being said, listen, everybody, remember those that have fallen. Okay, have a very good Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody enjoys their weekend. Be safe. I have a feeling there's going to be lots of booze consumed, boats, right? Listen, be careful. We know, be careful. And listen, just remember, understand what this means, right? Memorial Day weekend, what it means. If you see a veteran, let them know, hey, we ain't forgot about those that follow. Okay. With that being said, have a great rest of your day. We're going to be off Monday in observance. So we will be back next week for another edition of this DGD podcast per se. The Juan Fan Club, make sure to ring the bell, right? Ring the bell if you're on YouTube. Get notified so you can come in and campaign live. Okay. Just leaving that there, right? Simple enough. Juan, is there any parting words, if you will, before we wrap this thing up and go home for the weekend?
Well, those famous 2 words, go Dogs.
Keeping it
Happy
simple.
Memorial Day weekend.
Keeping it simple. All right, guys. With that being said, have a great weekend and go Dogs.
Go Dogs.